Paper Mario 64. This was the first time we saw Mario in his paper form, and the world is a better place because of it. I could sit here all day and talk about how beautiful of a game this is, but this video isn't about that. Paper Mario is one of my favorite game franchises, but the thing is, even among the best games, there are highs and there are lows. Not every chapter is created equal, which is why in this video, I'm gonna rank all 8 chapters from Paper Mario 64 from worst to best. At number 8, we have Chapter 5, Hot Times on Lava Lava Island. I want to preface this by saying that I hold every chapter in this game near and dear to my heart, but there are, of course, has to be a number 8. Right before this chapter, we receive intel that there is a star spirit being held captive in the volcano on Lava Lava Island, so of course, we ride a giant tuna fish across the ocean to make it to the island and save the star spirit. But what's neat about this chapter is that it's the only time so far in any Paper Mario game where we get to see a little Yoshi village, so that's kinda neat. So I know the concept of this chapter does sound pretty great. I mean, you go off to a Yoshi island, venture into the depths of a volcano to save the star spirit. Pretty great. Why is it number 8? To me, there's a few reasons. First of which is the section where you go into the jungle and rescue all of the Yoshi kids. This always feels like a chore on every single playthrough. I don't know what it is, but I just can't get myself to be excited for trekking through this jungle. The only real exciting part about it is that this is where Sushi joins your party and gives you the ability to traverse water. On top of that, it's not even that connected to the overall arc of the chapter. Right when you get to the island, you go off and try to enter the volcano, but oh wait, there's a gap in the way. Then you come back to the Yoshi village and all of a sudden the Yoshi kids have run off. And Mario is just like, okay, guess I gotta go do that now. So even though it does feel like a chore, there are some funny things about it. Like during the Yoshi hunt, I do like how if you talk to Goombario, he literally says he doesn't know how the Yoshis made it this far into the forest, which is funny because we literally need Sushi to carry us through the water to reach the parts of the jungle the Yoshis managed to get to. So it really does beg the question, how did they get there? It's a nice little meta moment. You see, the Yoshi rescue does tie in a little bit because once you accomplish it, the Yoshis from the village are very thankful, and so they give you a key to go see Raphael the Raven, who is this giant raven commander dude, and he has his foot soldiers build a zip line to get you over the lava moat and into the volcano dungeon. Because of course the ravens know how to build a zip line. I mean, come on, haven't you ever met a raven before? By the way, shout out to Raphael the Raven. He is one of the coolest characters who has never returned. And maybe this is an unpopular opinion, but I think the ravens should be playable in Mario Kart. Once you're in the dungeon for this chapter, things do get a little more interesting in my opinion. Colorado, the legendary Koopa explorer, provides for some comic relief, and the entire time you're reminded that the piranha plants are monitoring you as an intruder, which is pretty cool. Feels like some sort of stealth ops mission. The puzzles here are pretty easy for how far along we are in the game by now, but the lava piranha boss makes up for that by being one of the more difficult bosses you'll encounter in the game. Though he can be a pushover if you manage to utilize Sushi's water abilities to put out his fire moves. Most bosses in this game do have an exploitable weakness that correlates with your new partner from that chapter, and here it pretty obviously is Sushi's tidal wave or squirt putting out the fire. I do think that even though there is sort of this trek through the forest that ends up being a bit of a chore, the chapter does end on a high note because there is a very climactic battle with a good boss, and right after, when you save the star spirit, the end of the chapter screen doesn't send you straight to the Peach segment like the other chapters. This time, you actually have to escape the volcano before it erupts, before it sends you off to Peach's segment. So what starts out as a bit of a slog of a chapter does end on a pretty cool sequence of events, so for that, I can't really bash it too hard, but like I said, there has to be a number 8. At number 7, we have Chapter 1, Storming Koopa Bros Fortress. This is the first chapter in the entire Paper Mario series. This is the chapter that started it all. When people first popped this game in back in 2001, they didn't really know what to expect. They just knew they had to save the star spirits, and the first item on the to-do list was to raid the Koopa Bros Fortress. This chapter is charmingly simple, which is sort of to be expected for a first chapter in any RPG. Though as much as I appreciate this chapter for introducing the world to the Paper Mario universe, it's that same simplicity that keeps it from ranking a little higher on this list. When you break the chapter down, there really are only 2 things that happen. You go, and you stop the fuzzies enemies from terrorizing Koopa Village by beating them at their guessing game. Then you go to Koopa Bros Fortress and defeat the Koopa Bros. That's it. Pretty straightforward. There is some charm here though. I mean, Koopa Village is a cute little town where Koopas live. I'm not sure we've ever really seen any sort of home for the Koopas up until this point in Mario history, so that's neat. But by far the greatest part about this town is the mayor, Koopa Koot. Poor guy has shaky text for his dialogue because he's so far gone. After you leave Koopa Village, you pretty much go straight to the Koopa Bros Fortress, which is just a generic gray castle. There's honestly not a whole lot to say about Koopa Bros Fortress, it's just a generic castle. And on top of that, there's not even that much to say about this world since there isn't much to explore. I mean, you only really have to clear 5 linear screens before you make it to the fortress. You could finish this chapter in a half hour if you know exactly what you're doing. But like I said, this chapter isn't notable for having a complex storyline, it's notable because of the characters we meet. And unlike any other chapter in this game, we get not just 1, but 2 party members. Cooper is an aspiring adventurer who dreams of traveling the world like the legendary Colorado. Yes, the same Colorado who gets his rocked on Lava Lava Island. Cooper ends up being useful throughout the adventure with his ability to help you wipe an entire enemy team at once with his Power Shell and Fire Shell abilities. He's always one of my go-tos throughout the entire game. And Bombette is a Bob-omb who is being held captive in the Koopa Bros Fortress. Though when she meets us, she realizes that she could have just escaped by herself the entire time by blowing up the wall to their dungeon. Are we sure we want someone on our team who couldn't figure that out? Once you have your bomb squad assembled, you have to fight the Koopa Bros, who are basically just the Ninja Turtles. They're a bunch of Bowser fanatics who like to cosplay as him, but once you smoke them out of their costume, they're no tougher than a regular lineup of Koopa Troopers. I do like them as the first real boss of the game though, since they do a great job at setting up that quirky tone for the rest of the adventure. Overall, I do think Chapter 1 does a great job at setting the tone for the rest of the game, and of course, what it lacks in complexity, it makes up for with its charm. At number 6, we have Chapter 2, The Mystery of Dry Dry Ruins. Chapter 2 is where this game starts to pick up the pace. Kind of. We're not really in full throttle yet, but we're getting there. Things are picking up. Being that it's the first of the series, Paper Mario 64 kind of follows some traditional Mario norms, more so than some of the other Paper Mario games do, and one of the most obvious ones it follows is having the desert world as the second world. That's true in so many Mario games, even the more modern ones, but before we actually get to the desert, there is one little section called Mount Rugged that you have to get through first. I personally think Mount Rugged is a bit boring, and it's part of the reason why I'm not placing this chapter any higher on the list. I just feel like Mount Rugged is another one of those chores you have to complete to get to the good part of the chapter. All it consists of is a little fetch quest for Parakarry, who dropped his mail all over the mountain. Because he's useless, we have to do his job for him and get the mail back. This just means running back and forth a few times and fighting a bunch of Monty moles. Nothing too special going on here, but once we find all of Parakarry's letters, he decides to join our party. Okay, let me just process this for a second. We let Bombette join the team, who couldn't even escape Koopa Bros Fortress on her own. Now we're letting Parakarry join the team, who literally can't even deliver mail properly. Bowser's gonna win. Once we're finally off Mount Rugged, we get to the part of the chapter that I actually like, the desert. Right when we get to the desert, we have the great honor of meeting the legendary Koopa explorer Colorado for the first time. Though at this point in the game, we do still think he's some sort of legit legend like Cooper tells us, he has yet to show us his true colors. The desert itself is one of the most unique areas of the game. It's basically a giant grid with secrets and enemies hidden throughout. It's relatively difficult to get lost. All you have to do is just go back to find this track in the middle. I know I'm kind of passing off the desert like it's pretty easy to navigate, but bear in mind that this is my 6th or 7th playthrough. I'm acting all macho like I know the game, but the thing is, when I was a kid, I literally got lost in this desert for hours. I might have been a stupid kid. Once you're through the desert, you get to Dry Dry Outpost, and to be honest, I'm a big fan of Dry Dry Outpost and its mouse inhabitants. To get to Dry Dry Ruins, where the Star Spirit is being held, we have to come here first and then take the logical next step of grabbing a lime from the desert oasis to give to Mustafa. Some people may point to this quest as a little stupid, a little weird, but the thing is, I know from experience. I've been to the desert. Lemons and limes, they are scarce. They are a delicacy. It's not that easy to quench your thirst out there, so I get it. Once you get this mob boss his juice, he gives you the gem you need to get into Dry Ruins, and boy is this scene a treat. Seeing Dry Ruins emerge from under the sand is one of the most cinematic shots in the game. It has this dangerous, foreboding, but also mystical feel to it. It's up there as one of the best moments in the game in my opinion. But once you're in the ruins, it's exactly what you might expect. It's an ancient Egyptian feeling cavern, chock full of puzzles and enemies to defeat. I appreciate that the puzzles here feel like they have a noticeable step up in difficulty from the absolute cakewalk that is Koopa Bros Fortress. Though I still wouldn't describe these puzzles as difficult, you know, they're just a natural step up from what we had in Chapter 1. One thing I've always found satisfying about this game is the power boost you get from finding a new pair of boots or a new hammer. Here we find the super hammer, which we then use to smack the crap out of the boss, Tootin' Koopa, basically a Koopa mummy guy. I don't know, he's not too crazy. Overall, even though deserts are all too common in the Mario universe, this chapter does just enough to make it so that I don't hate it. And that's enough to keep this off the absolute bottom of the list. At number 5, we have Chapter 6, Dark Days in Flower Fields, or more commonly known as the Fetch Quest from Hell. Admittedly, the fetch questy nature of this chapter is not so bad on a replay because you do know exactly where to go and where to find everything, but the first time is a real pain. The fetch quest for this chapter begins well before you even make it to Flower Fields. It begins before you've even moved on to Chapter 2. To open the doorway to Flower Fields, you need to gather 4 magical seeds from these bulborb dudes who are scattered throughout the Mushroom Kingdom. They are, for the most part, hidden in plain sight, but the 2 trickier ones are located on Mount Rugged and in the Forever Forest, both in places that you could easily miss if you weren't looking for them, or if you weren't exploring the world as you go. This task isn't so bad if you do manage to naturally come across them on your first playthrough, or if you know to look for them because you've done it before, but the people who this would become a big issue for are the people who manage to make it all the way through Chapter 5 without finding a single magic seed. Those people are just gonna look up a guide. I mean, it's not that bad. Once you have all 4 seeds, you've punched your ticket to the next fetch quest, Flower Fields. Right when you enter the door, the great Deku Tree himself tells you that in order to rid Flower Fields of Huff and Puff and his clouds, you need to grow a beanstalk to reach his lair. And to do that, we need to fetch the magic seed, the magic water, and the magic soil. And to get all 3 of these items, we have to go fetch a bunch of other items, like colored berries, to feed the right flower people. So to sum this whole chapter up, you basically have to do a fetch quest to start the big fetch quest, which requires you to do a bunch of little fetch quests to finish the giant fetch quest. But then isn't this entire game a fetch quest by fetching all the star spirits? I don't know, man. This is getting too deep for Game Guy. This isn't really as bad as I'm making it sound though, because Flower Fields is quite nice. The ambience here is soothing, calming, with all the flowers and the trees and the amazing daisies and the flowers and the music and the flowers. It's certainly one of the more pleasant areas to frolic throughout. The partner we get in this chapter is Lackluster, the cool dude Lakitu who tries to get everyone to call him Spike. Spike? Spike. I've always felt kinda bad for Lackluster though, because he joins us so late in the game that he doesn't get too much of a chance to really shine. Though he does basically nullify Huff and Puff's most annoying ability. Lackluster has the ability to hit every enemy on the battlefield regardless of where they are, and this really nerfs Huff and Puff's mini cloud allies that he gets every single time you deal damage to him. So if you've leveled up Mario adequately up until this point, and then you utilize Lackluster's ability, Huff and Puff is honestly a cakewalk. Which is honestly a bit of a letdown for the Chapter 6 boss. Speaking of Huff and Puff, I do think he's one of the cooler bosses in the game. If you don't know how to use Lackluster's ability, he probably would destroy you. I just think he has a cool design. I also think it's kind of funny how Huff and Puff insults your intellect when you first meet him, and then the star spirit you save from him is Clevar, the intellectual star spirit. Overall, it's a pretty decent chapter. I think it's carried pretty heavily by its ambience and its theme. That's what keeps it off the bottom of the list. But what keeps it from the top of the list is, of course, the fetch quest part. Coming in at number 4, we have Chapter 4, Trials in the Toy Box. Full disclosure, I absolutely love this chapter, and it was hard for me to not put it higher on the list. It's honestly one of the first chapters, it's the first chapter that pops into my head whenever someone says Paper Mario 64. Chapter 4 begins before you even enter Shy Guy's toy box. It's as soon as you return to Toad Town after completing Chapter 3. You're greeted by a panic scene of Shy Guys stealing important items from the townspeople and running off into their secret hideout. What's interesting about this chapter is that it marks the first departure from this 2 two-act story structure that exists in most of the chapters in this game. And what I mean by that is that most of the chapters in this game have two parts to their storylines. For example, Chapter 1 has the Koopa Village portion right before it has the Koopa Bros Fortress portion. Chapter 2 has the Mount Rugged portion right before it has the Desert and Dry Ruins portion. And of course, Chapter 3 has the Forever Forest and Boo Mansion portion before you get to the Gusty Gulch portion. Chapter 4, on the other hand, is just this beautiful toy box in all of its glory. And I think that departure from the normal story structure helps this chapter stand out from the crowd. This also makes for a simpler story for this chapter. I mean, the one-sentence summary is all you need. Bowser gave the Shy Guys a Star Spirit to protect and told them that if they keep it safe, then they can do whatever they want. So they steal a bunch of stuff from Toad Town thinking they have Lord Bowser's protection. That's it. All we have to do is go into the box, get back everything they stole, and save the Star Spirit. And while that simple yet weird storyline is pretty funny, it's not the main selling point of this chapter. The main selling point is how crazy it is in the toy box. The fact that we shrink down to enter this magical toy box hidden in the back of a boarded up crack house, paired with the general vibe of the toy box with its bright colors, zany soundtrack, and varied Shy Guy inhabitants who, in the context of this chapter, really just seem like they're playing dress up. It just makes for a really interesting experience. The random crayon drawings all over the walls, implying that the Shy Guys just walk around drawing all over the place. It really is just a funny world in general that sticks with you real long after you've played it for the first time. One of my favorite things about this chapter is the random overpowered optional boss fight, Anti-Guy, who's just hanging out guarding this treasure chest for absolutely no reason. He's just a really beefy Shy Guy who will mop the floor with you if you don't come prepared. But taking him down is well worth the effort as you're rewarded with a Power Plus badge. I just love that of all the sections of this game to drop an overpowered optional boss, they chose to put it in the toy box. And of course, we do end up recruiting a new party member here. In this hidden dark playroom, we defeat this absolute creepo lantern ghost who's holding Watt captive in his lamp. Watt is this little electric baby who can light up any dark area and even reveal hidden blocks, which is kind of neat. Watt's battle abilities are pretty handy because she can pierce the defenses of any enemy without using any FP. Did I mention that Watt is also a baby? At this point, we don't have standards for this team anyway. And to cap things off, this chapter also has one of my favorite bosses in the game, General Guy. He's just a dressed up Shy Guy in a giant toy tank. Gosh, what is not to like about him? At number 3, we have Chapter 8. A star-powered showdown, the final chapter in the game. Honestly, this chapter could be higher. The only reason I'm keeping it out of the 1 and 2 spot, because the whole chapter is basically just an extended dungeon with the final boss at the end. Don't get me wrong, it is a great dungeon. It has some of the best challenges and puzzles in the entire game, and they utilize the abilities of every single partner you've acquired along the way. And that's why it's number 3. But I just don't feel like I can put it any higher because it doesn't have the same self-contained story arc that makes some of these other chapters so charming. I do understand the storytelling role that this chapter serves. I mean, it's just there to wrap up the entire overarching story arc that underlies the entire game, and maybe adding a little too much extra stuff here or there might have taken away from that effect, but I don't think it would have been impossible to add just a little bit more flair. For example, one of my favorite parts of this chapter is getting to finally ascend into the sky and see Star Haven, the home of all the star spirits. I mean, look at this place. It's such a unique, dreamy location, but the time we get to spend here is pretty short-lived. We basically just pass on through and get sent straight to Bowser's castle in our magical hovermobile. I would have liked to spend just a little more time here, like maybe when we get to Star Haven, we could have found that it was being attacked by some of Bowser's minions, and before moving on to Bowser's castle, we would have had to clear out Star Haven first. Could have been some sort of mini boss here. Just anything to give us more time in Star Haven. What's that all about, you know? Missed opportunity. Of course, the big highlight of this chapter is the final battle with Bowser, which is honestly a pretty great final boss fight. The battle is challenging, yet fair. You definitely need to have a couple of health replenishers on you, which isn't really true for every single boss in this game, but as long as you have them and you've leveled yourself up throughout the game, you should be okay. I like how we get to flex our new Star Beam ability, and I especially like how we get to battle Kammy Koopa as Peach and Twink. Even though that battle is completely scripted and requires no thinking, it feels like a nice conclusion to the Peach and Twink storyline that happens between each chapter throughout the whole game. They could have easily just passed Peach and Twink off to the side at the end here and had Mario deal with Kammy Koopa, but having Peach and Twink contribute to the final battle rather than just playing the pure damsel in distress role adds that extra spice that makes this final battle that much more satisfying. Overall, the final Bowser fight is a fitting climax to an amazing journey, and it might even be one of the better Bowser fights in the entire Mario series. But of course, there are 2 chapters in this game that I enjoy just a little more. But before we get to the top 2 items on this list, I just want to say there is an honorable mention and that is the prologue. There isn't too much here outside of learning how to play the game and setting up the story, but it is a charming start to the game. We meet our first partner, Goombario, and of course, who could forget the Goomba King. If you've made it this far into the video and you like what you see, why not just hit subscribe? It's free, and it's healthy. At number 2, we have Chapter 7, A Star Spirit on Ice. The penultimate chapter on this list is also the penultimate chapter in the game. Top to bottom, I find this to be the most charming chapter in the game. From the murder mystery of Shiver City to the baby star spirits of Starborn Valley to the winter wonderland backdrop underlying the whole thing, this chapter just has a special feel to it. Shiver City specifically is one of my favorite locations in the game, and the Penguin Mayor murder mystery you find yourself in the middle of is a perfect encapsulation of the weird humor this game has to offer. I just love the personalities of the penguins, and if you don't run around town during this segment and talk to every single penguin, you're missing out on some peak Paper Mario dialogue. Once that segment's squared away, the penguins let you leave Shiver City and you make your way over to Starborn Valley, which is one of my favorite pieces of Mario lore from this entire game. The concept of there just being a little hidden valley where stars grow up before ascending to the Star Haven is a piece of lore that is just so neat. The major, mind-boggling puzzle that leads you to the final dungeon of this chapter is dressing up these snowmen that are blocking up the hidden passage. You gotta put a bucket hat on one and a scarf on the other. The path that opens up leads you to the Crystal Palace, but this isn't just any path with a weird lineup of enemies. Seriously, what is this thing? No sir, this path has the best soundtrack in the entire game. Just take a listen. The Crystal Palace itself feels like it could be a Zelda dungeon. Of course, it's a little easier. I mean, this is Paper Mario, not Zelda we're talking about here. But Zelda Dungeon is definitely the vibe that this place gives off. It's pretty neat having to work back and forth between the two sides of this mirror wall, and the vibe of the palace is just so nostalgic. Can't really find another word for it. Notably, this is the first chapter we run into where we don't get a new partner. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I already feel like Lackluster, who comes to us in Chapter 6, isn't really with us for long enough. But wouldn't it have been cool if we could have had a penguin from Shiver City join us, or even one of the ninjas from Starborn Valley? And this lack of a new partner for this chapter is relevant to the Crystal Palace, because this means that the boss of the palace, the Crystal King, doesn't have as obvious of an exploitable weakness as a lot of the other bosses from the other chapters do. Instead of just spamming the moves from our new partner, we kind of just have to feel this one out and use whatever partners we feel will get the job done. This makes for a slightly tougher boss battle, which for this late in the game, I think is a great thing. The only bogus move the Crystal King has is that he can replenish 20 HP at will, and that can ruin your attempt. Crystal King is an interesting boss though. This is Bowser's top guy. I think he does his job of being an intimidating late game boss. And you compare him to like the Koopa Bros and it's a world of a difference. The last detail I love about this chapter is the design of the star spirit you save, Kalmar. Every single star spirit you save throughout this game has a really neat, intricate design with some sort of cartoony characteristic. And then you get to the last guy and he's just a generic star spirit with a pencil mustache, and it's just like, what? I'm not trying to slander Kalmar, you know? I mean, he's a cool guy. I just think it's funny that they saved the pencil mustache guy for the last star spirit. And at number 1, the best chapter in Paper Mario 64 is Chapter 3, The Invincible Tubba Blubba. This chapter does everything right. It tells an awesome story in a suspenseful way. It has some of the coolest locations in the entire game, and it introduces us to one of the most well-liked characters in the entire Paper Mario series. If you're playing this game for the first time, and for some reason chapters 1 or 2 didn't manage to hook you in, this chapter will do that. The basic story here is that Bowser is given one of the star spirits to this invincible Tubba Blubba, a character whose reputation is feared not just throughout the kingdom, but even among Bowser's ranks, as we overhear some of Bowser's minions expressing their fear of the monster during the Peach segment after Chapter 2. The first part of this chapter picks up right when we get back from Chapter 2. Find out that the Boos have summoned Mario to their mansion. To get there, we have to make our trek through the spooky Forever Forest, which is full of enemies and wrong paths that'll send you straight back to the entrance. The correct path will always be the one that has a slightly different environment. This is a section that I absolutely adore. I think the puzzle element of it, which is relatively simple, is clever, and I'm just generally a big fan of spooky areas in video games, but I could see how some people might not like this as much. It's kind of a preference thing. Assuming you don't get swallowed up by the boogeyman, you'll eventually reach the Boo's mansion, which has this awesome little sweeping cinematic intro. Relating things back to that 2-act story structure I mentioned that each of the chapters has, I think of all all the little part 1 stories that these chapters have to offer, I think Boo's Mansion takes the cake for being the most fun. It contains a sequence of puzzles and challenges we have to complete, chock full of charming Boo mischief and spooky vibes. And when we eventually reach the top floor of the mansion, we find out that, surprise, the Star Spirit actually managed to escape from the clutches of Tubba Blubba, only to be recaptured by the Boos. But of course, we can't have him back right away. Our quest isn't important to the Boos, you know? We're only trying to save the world here. Lady Bow tells us that Tubba Blubba has been terrorizing the Boos and they need our help to get rid of him. If we can beat Tubba Blubba, we can have the Star Spirit. Lady Bow joins our party and we're off on our way to Gusty Gulch. In Gusty Gulch, we bear witness to a horror scene. The invincible Tubba Blubba emerges for snack time and gobbles up an innocent Boo right before our very eyes. It's at this point that we realize how terrible this monster is, what little regard he has for human life, or Boo life, or afterlife. Whatever it is, saving the world can wait, because these Boos need our help. To save the Boos, we have to go to Tubba Blubba's mansion, which is another absolute highlight of this game for me. It feels like a covert stealth mission because Tubba Blubba has these floating survey robots hovering around the main foyer who will completely throw you out of the mansion if they catch you. On top of that, all of the Clubbas patrolling the mansion are asleep, so if you want to avoid battles, you have to be careful about where you step or how fast you move throughout the mansion. Eventually, we find ourselves in Tubba Blubba's bedroom where, like the rest of the Clubbas patrolling the castle, he is also taking a fat nap. We're supposed to be able to find the secret to his invincibility here, and we find this magic talking key that opens the door to the windmill in the Gusty Gulch. Of course, this talking key wakes Tubba Blubba up, and this starts the best sequence in the chapter, and possibly even the entire game. Tubba Blubba chases us out of his mansion, and we have to make it to the windmill without getting caught. The feeling of intensity here is like nothing else in the game. We even have a group of heroic Boos come to help us by holding the door. It's a true team effort. When we reach the windmill, we find out that Tubba Blubba's big secret is that his heart has been separated from his body and is controlling it from the bottom of the windmill. So we of course beat up on the heart, who is actually pretty easy as long as you're using out of sight to dodge his supercharged attacks. And we go back outside to beat up on the full body, which releases all of the Boos who've been eaten up until this point. Honestly, it's the most satisfying end to any chapter in this game. And that's a big part of why I have it up here at number 1. This chapter has an engaging story from start to finish. And on top of that, it just does the best job of giving us a motivation to see it through by showing us the horrors that these Boos are experiencing, which actually I'm realizing now is the ironic part of this chapter, because the Boos are usually the ones doing the scaring, but here, they're the ones experiencing the horrors. It's the best chapter in the game, and I think there'll be a lot of people who agree with me on that one. Let me know in the comments below how you might change the rankings on this list. And if you like this video and want to help me out, the best thing you can do is hit that subscribe button and go watch some of my other videos. One last thing about Paper Mario 64, and it is frankly a disturbing detail. I always thought that Bob-ombs were little round bomb people with no arms. But take a look at this scene from the credits parade. What in the world is going on here?